Hello and welcome to the photography channel. I'm Nigel Cooper and today I'm taking a look at the Canon EOS R5, the Canon EOS R6, and Canon UK were kind enough to also send me along this rather expensive but rather nice Canon 85mm f1.2 lens, and I've also got the Canon battery grip that will work with both of these cameras. Now I've had all this kit for about 2 weeks now. I've done a few shoots with them, both the cameras side by side, as you can see here on the computer screen. I did a shoot with a local model at a studio not too far from me where I was using both these cameras at the same f-stop, same aperture setting, same lens, same composition, everything, because I'm sure people are going to want to know what the quality difference is between the two. After all, the R5 is 45 megapixels, while the R6 is just over 20. I think it's about 21 megapixels. Let me just bring up the prices here. The R5 comes in at £4,300 for the body only. The R6 comes in at £2,599 for the body only. This lens, for those interested, beautiful lens, but it doesn't come cheap at £3,300, while the battery grip here is 420. So difference between 21 megapixels for the R6 and 45 megapixels for the R5. Okay, so how do I start this? When I first took delivery of these cameras, they're both identical in terms of weight and size and how they feel. The key difference is the R5 has basically got this little dial on top for changing through the modes, where the R6 has got a more traditional dial for your aperture priority, shutter priority, and that kind of thing. So that's a key difference there. Now, I got to admit, when I first took these out of the box and I kind of, had them in my hand, I was thinking, they don't feel incredibly heavy. And because of the fold-out screens on the back, the first thing I thought was D90 or D80. This is coming from somebody that's owned a Canon EOS 5D Mark IV, Canon EOS 5D Mark III, and I've even had the D70 and the D80 that I've just had for backup cameras or left in the car in the past. And they're very light. Now, I thought, the build quality isn't very good. But that's not true, because I'm a little bit old school, and for me, something's got to be really heavy to be built well. I've always associated heavy with quality and expensive, and lightweight with flimsy and, well, a little bit crap. But these aren't really that lightweight, but they are lighter than my old Canon EOS 5D Mark IV. They're not quite as chunky either. The Canon EOS 5D Mark IV just felt a little bit chunkier, a little bit heavier. But in fairness to Canon, these are mirrorless, so there's no pentaprism in either of these cameras, so you're not going to have any of the glass work in the pentaprism. There's no flip-up mirror, there's no mirror box, so there's a few things less that you would get over something like a 5D Mark IV anyway. Now, because they're light, that doesn't mean that the build quality is poor. It's not. The build quality is really good. They're really solid and tough. I've had a good play with these. All the buttons and dials, they're all very positive and tactile, and they do feel substantial, just lightweight. So that's great news if you're into saving weight. So well done, Canon, for that. And what I do like about these cameras, you may have noticed actually that the actual sensor is protected, because when you turn the camera off, as soon as you take the lens off, this actually pops down. So you've got the the sensor protected there, which I really like. Now, what I am going to mention in terms of ergonomics, as you can see here, my pinky finger is just sitting underneath the camera. It's not around the front gripping it. When I hold it naturally with my finger on the shutter button here, my pinky finger sits under the camera, and even the next finger along is only just on it. So if you're going to get either of these cameras, I would definitely recommend getting the battery grip. In fact, let me just put that on here right now quickly. I'm just going to remove this like so, and just quickly, oops, got to remove a battery as well. Put the battery grip on here. There we go. Now, with the battery grip on, it's like, that's better. Now I've got a big grippy camera that feels more substantial, and this battery grip has got 2 batteries in it. So suddenly we've got extra weight, so it just feels more professional now, and my little pinky finger is no longer dangling under the camera, but it is gripping the grip at the bottom. Now, for me, Canon make the best battery grips on the planet, because they have this extra bit that sticks out here. So when you're shooting in portrait, you've still got this grippy bit that your fingers come around at the front, and you've still got the trigger button here and all the relevant buttons around the back for your thumb. So for me, yeah, Canon definitely make the best battery grips because it's great holding it this way. And when you're holding it this way, you still have this extra bit down the bottom and it just feels much more substantial. And by the time you put your lens on, let me go there. I mean, this is now a beast of a camera. The lens, admittedly, is really heavy. It's kind of like having a 2-pound bag of sugar stuck on the front of the lens, or if you're European or American, maybe a bottle of wine or something. It's a pretty heavy lens, but it is an 85mm f1.2, so there's a lot of glass in there. So now this feels really substantial and chunky. So I'm very happy with the build quality of these. They are a bit lighter, so you'll be pleased there. Build quality is really nice, very happy with that. So I have taken some pictures here on the computer. So I suppose now is a good time for me to jump onto the computer and show you some side-by-side comparisons between these two cameras in terms of the pixel count and the overall quality. But what I will say off the bat is there is a difference in picture quality because of the resolution. In terms of tonal quality and color science and that kind of thing, I found the images to be pretty much identical. But with the more expensive one, when you zoom in and pixel peep, you can see that extra resolution. So let me jump onto the computer right now and show you some images. Okay, so before I show you the images, let me just show you a few video clips of what I was doing so you'll have a better idea of what I did when I show you the photographs. So this is a studio not too far from me. I had this model come in and she's posing with my guitar and microphone. I thought it would make an interesting shot. So I was using both the Canon EOS R5 and R6, both with the 85mm f1.2. I was working at f8 with a shutter speed of 1/60th for the flash duration, and both cameras were set absolutely identically, so there's not going to be any difference when doing the comparison shots. Okay, for this next shot, I was at my local Bentley dealership. The guys in there were kind enough to let me take a few shots and video this. As before, both the R5 and R6 with the 85mm lens, I was at f1.8 because I didn't want to go to f1.4 because there wouldn't have been enough depth of field to get all the car in focus, and I didn't want to go to f16 or f22 because of potential diffraction. So I was aiming for the lens's sweet spot at f8, and I simply switched between the R5 and the R6 with the same lens just so I could do these locked off shots for comparison purposes. Okay, and for this final shot, I was taking a picture of the bridge over the river in St Ives in Cambridgeshire, not too far from where I am. And as before, I was alternating between the EOS R5 and the R6 while still sharing the same Canon 85mm f1.2 lens. Again, I was working at f8 here in aperture priority as I switched the cameras over. And I just figured by shooting an outdoor kind of landscape shot, if you like, it would just add a little bit of variation to give you a better idea. Okay, so I've got Capture 120 open. I've got a couple of different sessions open here. On the left up here, if you look, it's got Canon R5, and on the right in this session, it's for the Canon R6. So R5 images on the left and R6 images on the right. I also do have here another session of shots that were taken on my Sony A7 III, just for comparison purposes. And I've also got this, which is basically 3 different cameras as well. My A7 III, the EOS R6 and the EOS R5, but I'll get back to that in a minute. So for now, let's just take a look at comparing the R5 on the left to the R6 on the right. And if you forget which is which, it does say up here at the top where I'm mounting around on both of these sessions. Okay, so both of them were using the Canon 85mm f1.2. They were both basically shot at f8 and with a flash speed of 1/60th. So the lighting, the shutter speed and the aperture was the same on both, so identical. I tried to get the composition as accurately as possible. I didn't have a tripod because when working with models like this, they tend to move around a little bit and you have to move with them. So off the bat, you can see that these images look really good. I've got sort of a medium sort of shot here as well for comparison purposes. So I love the punchy colours. The colour science of these cameras is really nice. So I'm just going to do a little bit of pixel peeping here for those interested. Let me just sort of zoom in a little bit here just so you can get a bit more of an idea as to what's going on in the skin tones. So again, on the left, the R5, the more expensive one, and on the right, the less expensive one with less megapixels, the R6. Okay, so even when you're zoomed in at this amount, now the zoom is going to be slightly different. I'm zoomed in at 67% on the left and 100% on the right to try and get the proportions the same, because with the R6 having less pixels, it is going to basically zoom in more. So when you're zoomed in at this sort of distance, you still really can't see any difference in that extra resolution. Let me zoom in a bit more here. Let me come into about there. There you go. It's only when you get into 200% on the R5 or 300% here on the R6 that you start to see the extra resolution that the R5 has. So I'm just going to go in even more here and let you have a look at the eyelashes and eyebrows is what I would be concentrating on here. So if you just look at this bunchy bit of eyebrow here, the individual hairs in this area here, and compare it to this area here of the R6, the definition here in the hair on the eyebrow is just a little bit more defined and easier to see than with the R6 on the right. Same for the eyelashes and the eyeball itself. If you look at the eyelashes down here compared to here, this is a little bit more blocky. This is a little bit more detailed because of that extra resolution. And if you look at the catchlight in the eye, that circle there compared to this one, and this little white area of eye here, it's just a trifle blocky compared to the R5 on the left. So that's one image there. Let me just sort of zoom out all the way and go to this next one here. This is a mid shot. Now, again, if I do the same thing, let me just sort of zoom in a little bit to about there. And there, here we go. Again, at this angle, they both look really good. If you're just sort of looking at them, they both look fine. Again, I'm just going to zoom in all the way here and just have a look at the eye again. Again, with the eyelashes here, there's just a little bit more detail in the eyeball compared to this. Again, I know the composition is not exactly, and it's hardly scientific, but you know, especially if you look at the eyebrow here, the hairs and the detail in those compared to here, there's just a little bit more sort of stepping on the edges of these ones compared to the one on the left. So, you know, not a huge amount of difference. I mean, just because the megapixels has gone up considerably, there isn't kind of double the amount of resolution and detail. From what I can see, the R5 seems to have maybe about another 25 or 30% at the most extra resolution in detail, and that's only when you're zoomed in at sort of between 200 and 400%. From this kind of range, you just don't really see it. It's too finite, to be honest, to be able to see all that extra detail. Okay, let me just sort of come down to this next shot. I took these literally within the space of about 10 seconds of each other. Again, these are just raw images. I've done no processing, nothing. I haven't even adjusted the exposure, no curves, zero. This is just a raw conversion without having doing anything at all. So I'm just going to basically zoom in a little bit more to this bridge so I can show you a bit of the differences here. There we go. Let's get them to a approximate similar size. There we are. Again, you know, if you just have a look at the brickwork here around this area and compare that to here, yes, you can see that there's a little bit more detail, and in these sort of fence, metal fence railings here, they're a little bit clearer compared to the R6 on the right. Again, it's only a small difference. It's not double. It's to me, it's about a 20% improvement. It's only kind of quite a small difference at the end of the day. Not huge. It's there. If you're a fine art photographer doing landscapes and you're going to be printing out massive, like 5-foot prints on a really good quality fiber-based paper with a very good printer and all that kind of stuff, then you might basically see that extra detail at that kind of size. But for the rest of us, you're not really going to see it. Okay, finally, local Bentley dealership were kind enough to let me plonk a couple of tripods outside and take some shots of one of their lovely cars. Okay, so let's just have a little zoom in here and see what we've got. Again, both of these were taken at f 11, I believe. Shutter speed was around about 3/60th. Tripod mounted, again, I took the shot with the R5 on the left and then put the R6 on the tripod. Same settings, everything. Just for the kind of geek factor, if I just sort of zoom right into this registration plate, again, this is just for the purposes of being able to see the definition. Here we go. Now, here on the left one, you can read the Bentley Motors Limited a little bit clearer than you can here on the right on the R6. You know, it's just a little bit better defined. And again, if you look at this sort of stepping down the edge of this letter Y compared to here on the R5 is definitely better. If I just move over to this corner here, if I just sort of zoom out a trifle here and here, you can see here that this says, well, I can, you might not be able to see on YouTube, but it says best plate there. Whereas on this one, you can't read that it says best plate at all. It's just kind of a little bit blocky, but I can make out that that says best plate only just, admittedly, but on that, it's impossible. Now, if you just concentrate on the bottom edge of this letter C compared to this one, again, the R6 being less in megapixels, I can actually count these steps coming down here, almost like JPEG stepping, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps coming down there. Whereas on the R5 on the left, I seem to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's 8 steps on that one and 6 steps on that one. So yes, there's more detail and resolution. Again, maybe a 20% increase or something like that. I'm not too sure how the science works. It's there and you can see it. But when you zoom out to a more regular viewing distance, something like this, you can't really tell. Again, I'm just going to sort of zoom right in here and pixel peep on this Bentley bit here. Okay, let me just sort of come in here, see if I can get these lined up a little bit. I'm just going to zoom in all the way as far as I can possibly get for this one, and same here. Again, because of the resolution difference between these two cameras, when you zoomed in all the way, there is a difference. I've actually got to back it out a little bit here on the left of the R5 because it does have more resolution. But again, if you look at the B in Bentley and the E and the N, and you look at the, you know, the BEN here, the stepping down this letter N here compared to this one, this just goes to show that there is more resolution there and that you can see that extra resolution on the R5 compared to the R6. Not huge, but it is there, and it's only there if you pixel peep. Now I'm just going to come back to these two images, and I'm just going to basically pull up my Sony one here just for comparison purposes. I'm not going to compare it to the R5 on the left, so I'm just going to put this in the place of the R5. So we're now just doing a little Sony A7 III compared to the Canon R6. Now, it's also worth mentioning on the A7 III, the lens which I had on it, which was a 80mm or 85mm lens, f1.8, it's only about £500 compared to the lens that was on the Canon that's heading for sort of £3,000 or whatever it was. So massive difference in price between the two lenses. And you've got to remember, it's all in the glass at the end of the day. I've always said that I would rather shoot on a really crap camera with a brilliant quality lens on it rather than the other way around, because at the end of the day, a camera is nothing more than a box. It's a pinhole camera at the end of the day. Admittedly, modern cameras have got lots of sort of dials and gizmos on them to make that a lot easier. But anyway you slice it, a camera body is simply a box that either holds the film or in this case holds the sensor. That's it. It does nothing else when push comes to shove. So it's all in the lens. So just remember that on the right here, the Canon did have a far superior lens. So if I just sort of zoom in a lot more here to this sort of eye area, from what I could see, there doesn't really seem to be any difference in resolution between these two cameras, looking at the hairs here in the eyebrow compared to this one, because the Sony A7 III has got a similar pixel count to the Canon R6. So I did scrutinize these images and there's no real difference in terms of resolution. However, I did notice something that the Sony A7 III does slightly differently to both of the Canon cameras. So up here on the top left we got the R5, on the right we got the R6, and here at the bottom we got the Sony A7 III. The Canon cameras both put in a slight yellowing to the skin tones, ever so slight. And if I basically now bring up this image, this is the Sony A7 III on the left, Canon R6 in the middle, and Canon R5 on the right. Both the Canon cameras, they do basically put in a hint of yellow into the skin tones. They sort of warm them up slightly, whereas the Sony doesn't do that. Now, the Sony did render a more natural image, because when I was there doing this shoot, I did take some mental snapshots of this model and her complexion and skin tones and how she looked, so that when I got back and I checked these images on my computer, within an hour of taking the shots, I had a vivid image in my mind of the model's skin tones and how she looked. And on the day, she was very pale in complexion, very gothic looking, and very white. She certainly didn't have any of this sort of yellowing. All three cameras were set the same way. Color bands were set to flash. Nothing different on any of them. But I did notice, having used the Canon R6 and R5 for a couple of weeks compared to the Sony, that the Canon does have a tendency to warm up or slightly yellow the skin tones. If you look at her arm here and chest there, you can see that there's slight yellowing. Same over here, a little bit as well. Whereas on the Sony, if you look at her arm here and her face, that slight yellow tinge isn't there. So I'm not too sure what that is with the Canon. It's not necessarily a bad thing. This can be sort of adjusted in post-production, as you know. It's just how the Canon color science works. I don't mind it. If you're a portrait photographer, you might like that slight yellowing of the skin tones. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. It's not a huge deal. It's just the way Canon do their color science compared to how Sony do their color science with some of their cameras. So there we are. That's the comparison over. There's not too much in it, in all honesty. Like I said, both the Canon R5 and R6 are superb cameras, really well built. Canon have got a great range of lenses for their mirrorless cameras coming out now. I think they still have to add some pro-grade R series cameras. You know, when the R1 comes out, I'd imagine that would probably be heading towards about 10 grand, knowing Canon. I think the EOS 1DX, or whatever it's called now, the latest pro DSLR of Canon's, is around about 6 grand. I'd imagine when the R1 comes out, it's going to be at least a grand more than that. But that's going to be something worth waiting for. But in the meantime, I think the R5 and R6 are kind of along the lines of the Canon EOS 5D Mark IV, as to, you know, that sort of semi-professional level. So there we are. There's some images. I hope you got something out of these. Okay, so that just about brings us to the end of the video. What I'm just going to point out quickly is I wouldn't get too concerned with the megapixel count difference between these two cameras. I know that a lot of photographers do like to have the extra megapixels, but what I'm just going to point out quickly is that we can't see most of them anyway. So if it was me, I would personally be going for the R6. That's because I actually prefer this traditional dial you have on top here rather than the LED screen with the push button function. But you've got to remember, even if you've got an iMac 5K Retina screen, that's only actually displaying 15 megapixels, and a 4K Ultra HD large television set only has about 8 megapixels. So at the end of the day, what are these screens doing with the rest of those megapixels? If you've got a 45 megapixel camera and a Retina display is only displaying 15 megapixels, then essentially 30 megapixels are just being dumped. You don't get to see them anyway. You only see all the megapixels when you zoom in at 200 or 400% and pixel peep. But what about when you print out, you may be asking? Now, this is a fair point, but if you're printing out up to about 4 foot along the longest edge, and that's on a really good quality photo rag paper with high quality inks, then either of these, you're not going to see the difference really at that size. It's only if you go above those kind of poster size things, and I'm talking about much bigger, that you will start to see the extra resolution of the R5. So I wouldn't be too concerned about it. If it was me, like I said, I would be going for the R6 because I just like the dial and I don't feel that I need the extra pixels. And what you've also got to remember is back in the day, in the 60s, 70s and 80s, you had photographers like Ansel Adams and David Bailey taking amazing photographs on cameras that were rubbish compared to cameras like these of today. Even the 500C, the Hasselblad medium format camera that Ansel Adams would have used, those Carl Zeiss lenses back then were nowhere near as good as this lens, or many modern day, even, you know, things like the Sigma Art lenses were way better than those, because back then the lens companies didn't have the amazing lens coatings and that sort of optical technology that we've got today. Yet those guys back in the 60s and 70s, they still produced images that evoked such incredible emotion. They were just so powerful. And I just fear that a lot of modern digital photographers haven't exactly killed the art of photography, but they're kind of ignoring it, more concerned with the specs that manufacturers put out and pixel counts, and less concerned with creating an image that just blows you away with sheer feel and emotion. So again, either of these are going to be brilliant. Don't concern yourself too much with the megapixel differences between the two. Pick whichever one you want. They're both great cameras, and just get out there and take some great shots. Okay, that's it. I'm Nigel Cooper. You've been watching the Photography Channel. Hope you enjoyed this and got something out of it. Thanks for stopping by. And as usual, hope to see you again real soon. Bye for now.